Hi side dishes. Today we're going to talk about how autism is not an excuse for poor behavior. I know it might sound crazy, but hear me out. Stay tuned. So one of the things I always tell parents of a newly diagnosed child with autism, or even a child who has been diagnosed with autism for several years, is that autism is not an excuse for poor behavior. And what I mean by poor behavior is behavior that we would just find unacceptable from anybody else. So for example, if you had a child with autism who pinched people, or who swatted at people, or who took the food off of another person's plate, I would say that that was poor behavior and there's no excuse for it. Just like you wouldn't let a typical child or adult engage in those kinds of behaviors, I don't think you should let your child with autism engage in those kinds of behaviors either. And here's why. We can teach our children with autism proper behavior. We can teach them that it is not appropriate to pinch people, because nobody likes to be pinched. And if they keep pinching people, nobody's going to want to be their friends, and they're not going to want to have a lot of people hang out with them. Now, it might be okay for a 3 or 4-year-old child to pinch somebody, but once they're 7, 8, 9, 20, that's totally unacceptable. And after so many years of a child being able to pinch somebody, to go in and teach them not to pinch somebody, we have to retrain all that learning history. They've been allowed to do something for so long. Now we've got to go and teach them that now you can't do that. So these are behaviors that we really should be able to, kind of nip in the bud. And when we see our children doing those behaviors, just like we would a typical child, we would say, hey, Johnny, don't pinch. It's the same thing with our kids with autism. We would say, hey, Bobby, you can't pinch. Maybe Bobby wants somebody's attention, but we can teach Bobby the more appropriate way to get attention. Same thing, I've seen teenagers with autism that were allowed to take food off another person's plate. And then somebody else would just give that person who got their food stolen, $2 or $3 so they could go buy a replacement. Well, that's just totally unacceptable. Nobody wants their food stolen off of their plate. And any way for a person with autism, or really anybody, nobody should be eating food off of somebody else's plates. Think of the germs, yuck. But also just think about the lack of dignity that goes along with that. That just makes people stare and talk, or could make this person with autism or a disability, stick out like a sore thumb. So it's really easy just to try to teach those behaviors when the child is young. Teach them that they have to eat the food that's on their plate. If they want something else, they can certainly point for it and ask for it, but they just can't take what's theirs. That's just a part of everyday life. It's the rules that we all live in, kind of the social contract that keeps the world together. And I know a lot of parents think that that's kind of hard to ask their children with a disability to have to follow some of these rules. And it is harder to teach them how to follow these rules, but we certainly can teach them to follow these rules. And in the long run, it's better for the child, and it's better for this child who's going to be an adult. And I think we have to give our children every opportunity to be able to learn these rules to fit in with the rest of the world. Because remember, that 4-year-old who's stealing pizza off somebody's plate someday is going to be a 24-year-old person, and we do not want that person stealing pizza off of somebody's plate, because really he's not going to have any friends, nobody's going to want to hang around him, people are going to be afraid of him, and it's just going to really limit his life. So I just think that you need to really look at your child's behaviors now and just think, how is that going to look when they're, 15? And so, if your child doesn't have verbal skills and they swat people away, absolutely, that is a form of communication. They are trying to say, get out of my way, I don't want you here. But there's better ways to tell somebody, get out of my way, I don't want you here, than swatting them. Again, so we can teach them more appropriate behaviors than swatting. We can teach them, to point to the door, to teach them the sign that they need a break, just to teach them to turn their heads, to do something like that. So while I understand people will say they're just trying to communicate their wants and needs, I absolutely get that, I understand it, but let's think about better ways to do that. And another thing to think about is it's always easier to teach the first behavior or the right behavior the first time. So I was actually just talking to a friend about this the other day. A lot of times when we're working with young children with autism and they kind of have limited or slow speech, slow, vocal behavior, we will not teach them the word potty. We won't say, I've got to go potty. We'll just teach them to say, I've got to use the restroom, or I have to go to the restroom. Because if we use the word potty is okay until the child is maybe, like 8 at the latest. But then after that, it starts becoming inappropriate. You don't hear 15-year-olds saying, hey mom, I gotta go potty. They say, I gotta use the restroom. So we'll actually just skip that whole step and start teaching a very young child, hey, I need to use the restroom instead of potty, so we don't have to go back and reteach that. So think about that as you're working with your child. If you see a behavior, just say, okay, we've got this pinching behavior, we don't want it. Let's try to get rid of it so we don't have to, we don't want it to morph into another behavior that we then have to teach another behavior to undo that behavior. So I just always want you to think about the big picture and always think that your child can do it, because 9 times out of 10, the kids that we work with and that we teach behaviors to, or try to teach appropriate, more acceptable behaviors to, they can do it. We just have to give them the chance. It might take them a little bit longer, but we can do it. And I always want to tell parents, never bet against your child, because if you do, they don't have a chance. Always bet with them, and you will win and they will win, and they'll have a much better, more accepting life in the world. Thanks for joining me. I'd love to hear your comments and questions. Please share Life with the Side of Autism. Leave your comments and let's have a discussion. Thanks so much for being here today.